The weightless Texas rig fluke catches fish literally everywhere in the country, but what if I told you there is not only one, but 3 better ways to rig it than this? Today we are going to go through each of my 3 favorite ways to rig a fluke by showing you the gear you need for each rig, how to rig it, and when to use each one to ensure that you can catch the most amount of fish possible on a fluke. Now there's no denying that the weightless fluke rig works great for bass fishing and will always catch fish. However, I think we can do a little bit better here by expanding on 3 different ways to rig this and different reasons on why I like each rig. Before we get into those 3 though, we must talk first about the original fluke rig, which is the weightless Texas rig right here. Why I don't like it as much, and that will lead us into why I like some of these other rigs better. So with the original fluke rig right here, I usually use a 5/0 extra wide gap hook. That extra wide gap is going to give you the best chance of getting a good hookup with these fish, especially with the belly slot that comes in these flukes to allow your hook to get exposed. When rigging one of these up, all you have to do is go down through the nose of the bait and come out the belly. You run your bait up the hook, spin it around on the eye, and then you go ahead and Texas rig your bait. And then whether you want to bury the hook in the back plastic or not, that is up to you. But here are the couple main downfalls of this rig. When you get a bite with this bait, the hook will collapse, and there is some gap in there, but what will usually happen is your bait will either stay up on the nose of the hook just like this, but because of that bend in the extra wide gap, it will actually block some of your hook gap, so the fish only has about a finger length of gap to be able to get into its mouth there when it collapses down. The other thing that happens is your fluke will actually slide down the hook and ball up like that. While you do get a better hookup in this scenario because you have the gap now, a lot of times what will happen is you're twitching your fluke, a fish will come up and nip it, you will set the hook and it will pull down the hook like this, and then the fish will not be able to get another chance at that bait. Your cast is now wasted, you have to reel in, re-rig your bait, and throw it back out. And after it slides down a time or 2, that bait is no longer useful. So that's gonna bring us into rig number 1 right here that will solve those issues right there. So for our first rig here, we are actually going to get rid of the extra wide gap hook. And you guys have probably seen this on the channel before, but we are gonna go with the owner twist lock hook here. I use the same 5/0 size. It is perfect for rigging on a fluke. And what the twist lock hook has is instead of that extra wide gap bend up at the front, it has a spring keeper instead. And that's going to help us in a few ways with some of those issues on that bait. So now I'm going to just center this bait up on this spring, twist it up on like I would on any other screw lock keeper bait or a shaky head or whatever you might fish that has that screw lock keeper, and your bait is now free flowing on that rig. So now I can take this hook and Texas rig this bait just like I did with the extra wide gap, and immediately the first thing you're going to get as a benefit out of this bait is that your bait cannot come down on this hook. So if you're twitching this and a fish comes up and bites this and misses, the worst thing that will happen with your bait is it will compress down just a little bit, but it will still have the same fluke action. It just won't be exposed at the top here anymore. So it can still dart around normally, and a fish can come back a second time and get that, which will lead to more fish at the end of the day. You have more chances of that fish being able to come back and get the bait. Now the other thing is, this fluke, because of the way that it is centered up on the top here and that centering pin swivels up and down, when a fish actually bites this and depresses it, it has much more gap. And because of the angle of this hook as opposed to the extra wide gap, you don't have almost like a weed guard in place on your hook. You have a wide open connection to the point of your hook there, so your hookups are going to be much better with this bait. If you're having trouble landing fish on a fluke, I've said this one time and time again on the channel, ditch the extra wide gap hook and go with the owner twist lock, and your hookup ratio will go through the roof immediately just with that simple change. Now let's get into technique number 2, where we're going to take a variation of this rig and allow us to do some different stuff with our fluke. So what if you want to fish your fluke a little bit deeper? I love to pond fish with a fluke. That's how I grew up fishing. I love to fish shallow cover with a fluke in the springtime when the bass are up there. But what happens when you're fishing places like Lake Hartwell or other spotted bass fisheries, or even places where you know they'll eat the soft plastic jerkbait, but you can't get a hard jerkbait through it, like a grass fishery, but the grass grows down in 4 to 6 foot of water? What if you could get your fluke down in that area and get the same action with a weedless profile? What I'm going to do for this rig is I'm going to take either the same hook or the same type of hook. I do not have any of the weighted version of this right now, but I will link it in the description below if you want to get some. They're identical hooks, just with some weight on here. Or what you can do is you can get some lead wire and literally wrap it around the hook shank on here. And by wrapping it around the hook shank on there, you will add some weight to your bait. Now, the way that this hook is set up in this bait, adding some weight to it is going to do a few different things for you. The first thing it's going to do is, instead of your bait falling nose first, it's going to actually shimmy a little bit because the weight is on the hook. And if you actually use lead wire, you can adjust where that lead wire sits on your hook to get a true shimmy out of the bait. So if you use lead wire, I actually like to put it all the way back at the very bend here. It won't get in the way when you depress the hook, and it will give that bait a little bit of a shimmy on the way down. The other thing this will allow you to do is fish it deeper in the water column. So instead of this thing skipping across the top of the water because it's unweighted, it will actually sink down a little bit, and you can fish this 4, 6, 8, even 10 foot deep, depending on how much weight you want to put on here. Now, the more weight you add, if you add something like a 3/8 ounce weight or a 1/2 ounce weight on here, your bait is going to sink very fast. It might sink nose first, and the action will be limited because of the way that that weight is going to drag against the bait. But if you're only putting a couple of wraps of lead wire on there, or using like a 1/8 or a 3/16 ounce size owner twist lock, it's going to sink perfectly and have the right action down there in the water at deeper depths. Now, the last thing this trick is going to do for you, which I've done a ton on Lake Hartwell, I learned about this when I was fishing the BFL All-American down there, you can actually pull this bait instead of twitch it. So most of the time when you're fishing a fluke, you're going to twitch, pause like you would a jerkbait. So it's gonna dart, and then shimmy or fall. What you can do with a weighted hook to get schooling fish fired up is you can throw it out there, twitch, and do a long pull with your rod. And what will happen is it'll twitch, and when you pull, the tail, because it's free flowing, it will literally look like it's a fleeing bait fish. It will run straight, but it'll have like an aggressive fleeing motion to it. The tail will shimmer, and when you stop that pull and slack gets put into the line, it'll shimmer for a 3 or 4 foot, and then it'll dart off to the side. So it'll be like a twitch, shimmer, and another dart. And it gives it a very different action than what other people are doing with their fluke on the weightless Texas rig. So maybe try that one next time you're out. If you have very aggressive and schooling fish, you can throw some weight on your hook and get a different action out of your bait. Lastly, let's get into what happens when the bait fish are smaller and the fish want a smaller profile. Let's show you how to combat that one as well, and another awesome rig for a fluke. Now, for the last fluke rig that I'm going to use here, we're gonna go finesse fishing. What happens, like I said, when those bait fish are smaller? I'm gonna rig this up on a 5-inch fluke so you can see what's going on here, but I've done this on the Super Fluke Junior, is my favorite. It actually has the best action ever. If you use the Super Fluke Junior with this rig, you will get amazing dying bait fish action out of that bait. And I've even done it with the original fluke or the tiny fluke and caught fish using the same technique. So you can use a 2.5 inch fluke bait and twitch it like a dying bait fish on a spinning rod and get bites with it. What we're going to do instead of the Texas rig hooks and stuff like that, again, we're gonna stick with the theme of screw locks here, but we're gonna buy just the screw locks themselves. These are called hitchhikers. I order them as well. Again, everything will be linked in the description below. If you wanna help the channel out or get the baits in today's video, helps me out a ton. What we're going to do is we're gonna take this screw lock and put our bait on just like we have everything else so far. So we're gonna thread it on so that it is straight on that screw lock. And you'll notice that this screw lock has like a circular loop at the top here. I want that circular loop to be flat with the nose of the bait and in parallel with the line of the entire bait so we can put our hook through there. We'll show you that right here. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna twist this all the way in, and when I get this twisted all the way into the nose of the bait, you'll never get this all the way through just because it physically can't do that, but you can kind of back it into the bait a little bit like that. And when it's flat and parallel, I will take just a size 1 drop shot hook. And again, we're gonna be fishing this with like a Fluke Junior, so you're gonna have a much smaller bait on here, and you can hook it right through that hitchhiker And when you hook in that little circle of the hitchhiker, if a fish grabs the back end here, it can pull and it will not get that bait off. You can see I'll rip the bait before the hitchhiker comes off. If you just had that nose hooked on a bait and a fish came up and nipped the back end of it, when you twitched, you'd literally rip the nose out of the bait and that fish would take the bait and your hook would keep going. This is combating those short striking fish again. If a fish comes up and nips this and you twitch it like that bait is still evading the fish and it's still darting away, it might come back and try and go head first next time, and that's where your hook is. So if you miss fish, they can come back and get it as long as you have that hitchhiker in there. So I just hook it nose hook just like I would a drop shot, and that keeps it on there. And your bait will fall nose first this time because all of the weight is right here. You have no weight in the back of your bait. But like I said, if you pick the right size bait, like a Fluke Junior, it works a lot better. And when you twitch it with that spinning rod, it has the perfect darting action through the water with this rig. So give this one a shot if you have fish feeding on smaller bait fish, or you have fish that are just a lot smaller in general, and you will catch a ton of fish on this setup too. So while these rigs are excellent at catching bass on a fluke, there are a few more things you need to know to catch even more fish on a fluke and have the most amount of success. And if you want to see what those are, check this video out right here. Hit the subscribe button down below, and thanks for watching. We'll see you on the next one.